Hi everyone, my name is Catherine. I'm not someone special nor a role model. I'm just an ordinary person who once lived in dark days and found myself lost in a world of hidden currents where drugs were my only friend and loneliness was my constant companion. I don't remember exactly when I started using drugs. It all started with moments when I felt tired, when I felt like I had nothing left, no one to hold on to. At that time, drugs were the only thing that made me feel like I could survive each day. I wasn't myself anymore. I became someone I couldn't even recognize. My life revolved around the struggle with drugs, long nights without sleep, and days that blurred into the smoke. The loneliness surrounded me, no one understood me, and I couldn't tell anyone what was happening. At that time, I didn't realize that I was falling into a deep hole, and I didn't know how to get out. The physical and mental exhaustion became part of my everyday life. Every morning I woke up feeling more tired than I had ever been. But the worst part wasn't the fatigue, it was the numbness. I no longer felt joy or happiness, just emptiness. A space where I couldn't find a way out. The relationships around me slowly fell apart. Friends were no longer friends, family was no longer family. The feeling of abandonment was easy to recognize, and I began to believe that this was my destiny. I no longer saw any light, just darkness surrounding me. And then one day, something changed. I don't know exactly when, but I knew that moment had arrived. The death of my best friend was the hardest blow I had ever faced. She died from a drug overdose. She didn't realize, like me, that she had lost herself to addiction. And I realized something I could no longer deny. I could be the next one. When I saw her body no longer breathing, no longer with light in her eyes, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I was faced with the truth I could no longer avoid. I needed to change, or I would have no more chances to live. A sense of hopelessness and fear filled me, but at that moment, I began to ask myself, if I don't change, I could die at any time. I made a decision. I was going to detox. It was a choice I knew I had to make, even though I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew that if I didn't step forward, if I didn't change right then, I would have nothing left. That was the most important moment in my life. I decided not to let myself continue living in that pit, not to become a walking corpse, and I began my journey toward life. When I first went into detox, my body felt as if it was completely detached from me. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion, it was a spiritual collapse. From the moment I started using meth, I felt myself slipping further and further away from who I truly was. Every hit felt like it erased a little more of my identity. I became someone who no longer knew love, care, or even the simple pleasures of life. The cravings were relentless, gnawing at my mind, and the withdrawals from the drugs left me hollow and vulnerable. But at that moment, lying in that sterile, cold room, I felt a sense of finality. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't eat or keep anything down. My body had become a shell, and my mind was slipping into a dark abyss. I knew I was dying, not just physically, but mentally. The drugs had destroyed my ability to function. I felt like I had no future, and that this was the end of the road. I started thinking of death as a release, a way out of the suffering. I welcomed it, even. Death had started to feel like a comfort, an escape from the constant battle in my mind. But as I lay there, sinking deeper into this hopelessness, something changed. It was subtle at first. A warmth, a presence, like a soft glow in the dark. I couldn't explain it, but I felt someone was there, someone who wasn't just watching, but was reaching out to me, guiding me somehow. It wasn't until I was completely enveloped in that warm light that I realized who it was. It was God. The presence was undeniable, and although I couldn't see clearly, I knew it was Him. The moment He touched me, I felt the weight of my past, the guilt, the shame, and the pain start to lift. I could feel His compassion, His forgiveness, and it was overwhelming. I was drowning in despair, but He was there to pull me out, to show me that I was still worthy of being loved, that my life still had meaning, despite all that I had done. I had lived a life full of mistakes, choosing addiction over relationships, ignoring the pain I caused to those I loved, abandoning myself in search of a high. I had been broken. But in that moment, God wasn't showing me judgment or condemnation. He was showing me grace. There were no harsh words, no reprimands, just an understanding of my pain and the message that I was not beyond redemption. You are not meant to die, He told me without words, but I understood it clearly. You are saved. There is still a purpose for you. I had no concept of why I was being given another chance. I had been so lost, so far gone. But in the presence of God, I began to understand that life wasn't over for me. It had only just begun. My addiction, my pain, didn't define me. There was still time for me to change, to find my way back to the light. I felt my heart begin to soften, the walls around my soul slowly starting to crumble, as if God Himself was mending the broken pieces of me. You have a mission, He said, though it wasn't spoken aloud. It was an impression I felt deep in my heart. You are to help others, to show them that they too can be saved. Your suffering was not in vain. You have the power to change, and through your change, others will find hope. The message was clear. It wasn't just about saving myself. It was about using my story to help others. I realized that the pain I had experienced, the dark path I had walked, could now become a beacon of hope for someone else. My survival wasn't just for me. It was for those I could help. As I stood there in the light, I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. My suffering had meaning. The years I spent in addiction, the pain I caused, all of it had led me to this very moment. It was part of a greater plan, a plan to redeem me, to guide me into a life that wasn't just about existing, but about making a difference in the world. This was my chance, and I knew that I couldn't let it slip away. In that instant, everything changed. I felt a deep, unshakable peace fill me, something I had never experienced before. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole, and I knew that from that point on, my life would be different. I had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to live with purpose. The most profound lesson that God showed me in that moment was the power of redemption. I had spent so much time believing that I was too far gone to be saved, that my mistakes had irreversibly damaged me. But God showed me that no matter how far we fall, no matter how much we mess up, we are never too far gone to be redeemed. We are never beyond the reach of His grace, and that was the first time I truly understood the meaning of salvation. Not just being saved from death, but being saved from the death of the soul. In that space of light, I felt no more anxiety. Everything around me became clear and peaceful. I no longer felt guilty or ashamed of the things I had done. Instead, I felt a peace that was beyond anything I had ever known. I realized that death was not the escape, it was life that gave me the opportunity to change. And the most miraculous thing was that God had not abandoned me. He saved me from the despair within my soul. God showed me that life isn't just about surviving, it's about having a greater purpose. My mission was not just to change myself, but to help change others, those who were falling into the darkness just like I had. You will not die, you will live, He said, and He gave me a great responsibility. You will no longer live for yourself. You live for those you can help. At that moment, I didn't need to hear more. It was clear. I understood that my life was not meant to just exist. It was meant to fulfill the mission that God had given me. I no longer lived for myself. I lived for those who needed me. And that is why I must live, I must change, and I must continue walking the path that God had shown me. After that powerful encounter with God, something inside of me shifted. I can't explain it with mere words, but I felt as if my entire soul had been realigned. The darkness that had consumed me for so long was suddenly replaced with an overwhelming sense of light and peace. It wasn't just physical recovery, it was a spiritual rebirth. At first, my body felt fragile, like a delicate shell that had barely survived a storm. Detoxing was still painful, but it wasn't as terrifying as before. I had felt like I was on the verge of dying, but now I felt like I had been given a second chance to truly live. The addiction still gnawed at me, but I wasn't facing it alone anymore. I had God by my side, guiding me through every moment. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the suffocating weight of drugs and despair. I didn't know how to explain it to others, but I knew something fundamental had changed in me. My perception of life was different. It was as if I had been blind and now I could see again. I began to see beauty in the world around me, things I had never appreciated before. I saw the sunlight pouring through the windows and it felt like a gift. I heard the laughter of other people and I felt a sense of connection. Everything that had once seemed insignificant now felt precious. But the most significant change came from within. I felt a peace deep in my heart, a peace I had never known, even in the best moments of my life before addiction. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. I wasn't just existing anymore, I was truly living. I could hear God's voice more clearly than ever, and His presence seemed to surround me, guiding me through each step of my recovery. As the days passed, I began to feel stronger, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. I could look at myself in the mirror and see a person who was worthy of love, who was capable of change. It was like a veil had been lifted, and I was seeing myself as God saw me, not as the broken, lost soul I had believed myself to be, but as a person with potential, with purpose. As I began to change, I realized that recovery wasn't just about getting my body clean. It was about healing my spirit, my heart. The drugs had numbed me, but God had awakened me to the reality of my own worth. I began to understand that I wasn't defined by my past mistakes or my addiction. I was not the broken, lost person I once believed myself to be. I was someone with a future, someone with a purpose. God had given me the gift of life again, but it wasn't just life. It was a life that was now filled with meaning, filled with the potential to make a difference. I had been saved, but I also knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The road to recovery was long and would require me to confront the wounds from my past, the deep scars left by addiction, and the relationships I had damaged along the way. I realized that for so long I had run from my pain. I had buried it beneath the haze of drugs, avoiding the hard truths about who I was and what I had done. But in that peace, I knew I had to face those truths head on. The healing process would require me to acknowledge the mistakes I had made, the lives I had hurt, and the person I had become. But it also meant forgiving myself, just as God had forgiven me. The journey was not easy. There were days when I felt like giving up, days when the cravings were overwhelming, days when I questioned if I had the strength to continue. But in those moments, I remembered God's words. You are not alone. You are saved. You have a purpose. And with each day, I began to believe it more. Slowly, the addiction lost its hold on me. I found the strength to resist, to keep going, to rebuild my life piece by piece. And through it all, I never felt alone again. God's presence was always with me, guiding me, reassuring me that I was not defined by my past, but by the future I was now creating. As I began to heal and rebuild my life, I realized that my recovery wasn't just about getting clean, it was about something far bigger than myself. The moment I experienced God's grace and felt His calling in my life, I knew that I had a responsibility to share this gift with others. I wasn't just saved for my own sake. I was saved so I could help others who were lost, who felt trapped in the same darkness I had once known. I started to look at the people around me differently. The faces I saw in the detox center, the people who were struggling like I had, became the faces of my mission. It wasn't enough to simply get better. I had to help others find their way too. I couldn't just sit idly by and watch people suffer when I knew the path to healing. I felt the weight of that responsibility on my shoulders, and I knew it was my calling to give back. It wasn't easy at first. I still struggled with my addiction and the deep wounds of my past. But every time I spoke to someone in the detox center or in recovery groups, I felt a surge of purpose. When I shared my story with them, I wasn't just telling them about my pain. I was showing them that change was possible. I was proof that recovery was not only possible, but that it could lead to a life filled with purpose and meaning. I started to volunteer at local support groups, sharing my story and helping others through the recovery process. I began to see the impact I could have on others, and it felt like I was finally doing something meaningful with my life. I wasn't just living for myself anymore. I was living for the people who needed help, for those who were still lost in the same darkness I had come from. As I shared my story, I began to see the power it had. People came up to me after support group meetings and told me that my words gave them hope. They told me that hearing my journey made them believe that they too could change. And that's when I realized how important it was to share my experience. I had been saved not just for myself, but to be a living testimony to the power of God's grace and redemption. I started speaking at local community events, telling my story to groups of people who were struggling with addiction. The more I spoke, the more I realized that the pain I had gone through could be used to help others. Every tear I shed, every story I told, was a step towards healing for someone else, and I began to feel a sense of purpose that I had never felt before. In the process of helping others, I found my own healing. There was something incredibly cathartic about sharing my story and seeing the positive impact it had on others. It reminded me that my life still mattered, that my past mistakes didn't define me, and that God had a plan for me all along. Every time someone reached out to thank me for helping them, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I knew that this was what I was meant to do. But it wasn't just about helping people in detox or addiction recovery programs. I realized that my mission extended beyond that. I needed to live my life in a way that reflected the lessons I had learned. I needed to be the person who showed others what it meant to live with purpose, to live with integrity, and to live with love. I wanted to be the light that God had shown me when I was lost in the darkness. As I reflect on my journey, I realize how far I've come and how incredibly precious life is. For so long, I took life for granted. I thought I had all the time in the world, but the truth is, life can change in an instant. One bad decision, one wrong turn, and everything can be turned upside down. But what I've learned from all of this, from the darkness and the despair, is that life is a gift, one that we should never waste. I can't change my past, and I don't want to erase it either. My past, the mistakes I made, the pain I caused, have all shaped who I am today. But what I can do is use those experiences to help others. That's the beauty of life. No matter how lost we may feel, no matter how broken we think we are never beyond redemption. There is always a chance to start over, to change, to heal. When I was at my lowest, I thought there was no way out. I believed that I had ruined everything, that there was no hope for me. But God showed me that it wasn't too late. He showed me that even when we think we are beyond saving, He is always there to pick us up. And that's the message I want to share with anyone who is struggling, anyone who feels lost or hopeless. You are not alone. You are loved. You are not beyond saving. The journey of recovery is not easy. It's full of challenges, temptations, and setbacks. There will be days when you feel like giving up, when the road ahead seems too difficult to travel. But I want you to know, from someone who has been there, that you can make it through. You can find your way back to the light. It takes time, it takes courage, and it takes faith, but you can do it. And even when the journey feels impossible, remember that you are not alone. There is always hope, and there is always a way forward. If I can turn my life around, so can you. If I can find peace after years of chaos, so can you. If I can find my purpose after years of wandering in darkness, so can you. I know that there are people out there who feel like they don't have a chance. people who feel like they've made too many mistakes, or people who feel like they've wasted their lives. But I want you to hear this. You are not defined by your past. You are not defined by your mistakes. You are defined by the person you choose to become from this moment on. When I was in the depths of addiction, I couldn't see any way out. I was blinded by my pain, by my guilt, by the shame of my choices. But God saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And He's telling you the same thing. You are worth saving. You are worth loving. You are worth changing for. And even though the road to recovery is long, even though it feels like a battle sometimes, every step forward is a victory. Every day that you choose life is a victory. Every time you resist the urge to give up, every time you choose to believe that change is possible, you are winning. So don't give up. Don't let your past define you. Let it be the fuel that drives you to become the person you were always meant to be. You can find peace, you can find hope, and you can find your purpose. And if you ever feel like you're alone, remember that God is always with you, just as He was with me. In closing, I want to leave you with this. Life is precious. Every moment, every breath is a gift. No matter where you are, no matter what you've been through, remember that you are never beyond hope. The road may be hard, the journey may be long, but you can always find your way back to light. You are not alone, and you are not beyond saving. If I can stand here today and share my story with you, then I know you can rise above whatever's holding you back. There is always a way forward, always a reason to hope. God has a plan for you, and no matter how far you've fallen, He is always ready to welcome you back into His embrace.